Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 1, up to Chapter 124. And it's really these are key chapters because they're like a summation, you can say a bridge between the different sections of Ayin Beis, especially now that this is the last mimer of the first section of Ayin Beis, which began Shavuos, Tafresh Ayin Beis, which is Shavuos 1912, and concludes now in this mimer Vayigash Tafresh Ayin Gimel, basically from, you can say, June 1912 through December 1912. Then the Rebbe Rashab went off. We usually travel in the winter to Europe, and the Hemshech would continue and resume Shavuos Ayin Gimel, which basically means between December, another 6 months. So this is Vayigash. This is the 31st discourse. And just for the record, I should also add a good, nice piece of history is that this is the last mimer that we always had. Hemshech Ayin Beis always existed. In Kupir it was called. Kupir means that the Rebbe had given it to be copied. In those days what they did was actually they had maitikim. A maitik was someone who physically copied from the original manuscript, and copies were made. So everyone had, Hemshech Ayin Beis was in Kupir, my days in yeshiva, even before the Rebbe published it, the first 31 discourses always existed. So till the end of Vayigash was always there. After that, it did not exist. And the Rebbe first published it was, as we've discussed many times, in very so-called mysterious circumstances. Yutes Kislev Tavshin Lamed Zayin. It's exactly 35 years ago. Right, 35 years ago. Lamed Zayin, Mem Zayin. What? Yeah. 35 years from when the Ayin Beis, from when we started it. Basically, 65 years after it was delivered, the Rebbe published it, as you all know, the Sikha Yutes Kislev, with all the cautions and the challenges. So clearly, it's a crucial component. So I just wanted to give a little background. So we're now in this middle of the 31st discourse, chapter 124, page 240, Reish Mem, and just give a summary because of the last chapter that. So mapping out, we'll call it mapping out the spiritual order, or you can say the spiritual building blocks, spiritual genome. That's a good word. Since we'll talk a little psychology in terms of this mapping out the unconscious, the spiritual unconscious that energizes and brings to life conscious existence as we know it. So what's behind the scenes, the tip of the iceberg on the conscious level, on the outer conscious level that we experience. So we experience existence as every one of us experiences. We have our sensory tools. I'm going to work our way from the bottom up. We have our sensory tools, which we observe and perceive existence. Everybody. You don't need any level of intelligence. As long as you have healthy eyes and ears and taste, touch, and smell, we have 5 senses that experience life. You either see it, you hear it, you taste, you touch, and smell. But it doesn't take much to scratch the surface and realize there's more going on than meets the eye or meets the other 4 senses. For example, things like love, pain. I don't mean physical pain, psychic pain, things like ideas, all feelings. These are all not experienced through empirical senses, but they're clearly real. And they're actually more real than the other things. The others are superficial. Love, or the lack of it, can destroy a person's life or can build a person's life. So how do we experience that? We need other tools. So we have also, call them other faculties. We have a mind and we have a heart. We have moichin and midis. We have keiches and nefesh. These keiches and nefesh can observe, can analyze, can perceive, can dig deeper. The question is that all there is? You can say, okay, fine. The answer is no, because we know that the faculties themselves are also shaped by forces that we cannot directly perceive. We perceive them through extrapolation, as the Rebbe Rashab calls it, Yudiyas HaShlila. on the basic level. We're not talking on the highest levels. We extrapolate that if something is affecting your conscious mind, then there must be something behind the curtain that is shaping it. And where do ideas come from? Where does Chachma come from? So in Chassidish terminology, Chachma through Malchus are the faculties, the conscious faculties. The perceived reality that I began with through our senses, that's even lower than the faculties. That's as the faculties manifest in Bri Yitzir, Asiyah, Ruchnis, Gashmis, and Chumris, all the way the crass world that we live in, which has levushim and garments. So our senses really relate to things that even the farthest, even the heaviest and thickest garments do not conceal. And that is the reality we see. The trees, the birds, the sky, the earth, mineral, vegetable, animal, and human being. These are the pieces of existence that we can relate to, because after all the cloaks, this is what emerges. But as you start digging inside, the 10 building blocks are the 10 faculties in the human being, or the 10 spheres in all of existence. But that's conscious. What does the unconscious look like? Or what is behind the conscious? That we call Keser. And in Keser itself, as he spoke, is 2 levels. There's Atik and Arich. Arich and Atik. Arich, you can call it the unconscious, and Atik like the un. What do I mean by that? That Arich is one step right behind the curtain. So it's still concealed, but it's not fundamentally beyond us. Atik, from the word netak, as he said, is removed, is fundamentally beyond. In the faculties themselves, the way they describe, we learned this earlier, in the faculties themselves, you have keches geluyim. That's when your mind is actively at work. You're thinking of an idea right now. You're feeling a feeling of love, a feeling of humility, a feeling of gvura, withholding, repelled, or attraction. The chesed and gvura, attraction and repulsion. The arich behind that would be, where does that conscious idea come from? So for Chachma would be Chachma Stima. Chachma Stima is the counterpart of revealed conscious wisdom. On the other side of the curtain is Chachma Stima. If you go deeper, where's Chachma Stima come from? You're going already now not into Koiches Nalamim, not concealed faculties, you're going into what we call core faculty. Now it doesn't even have a shape and form. Now, applying it to where we are here now, where we're discussing now, Rabbi Rashab is tying it all together in the interface and saying that Sefirot, which is really the building blocks of all existence. There's 10 spheres. Those are the 10, the Nishtal Shlomehen, as Tanya says, into our 10 faculties. But there are also 10 building blocks in all of existence. So the same 10 faculties inside of us also rule existence. In a sense, that's what makes us Olam Katan Za'adam. Microcosm, macrocosm. Everything out there is within here. Everything here is out there, in macrocosmic fashion. So the 10 spheres have 3 definitions, or 4, as we've added now, in this last chapter. The 3 are number, story, so mispur, sipur, and sapir, brightness. All 3 names, all 3 interpretations, the same name, the same word. So it means that the spheres themselves carry these 3 elements. So you can actually say that the mispur part of the spheres is like the tangible reality that we relate to. Number, you can count it. Yeah, you can tell, as they say. You can touch it and count it. The sipur is already telling you a deeper story. What is the story? Like he said, first it's the story of the faculties, the story of the 10 spheres, the revealed spheres. The kelim revealed, the air. Every container, there's an energy without, and you don't see the energy, but recognize it. Then it tells you, machshavas nalamis. It tells you that there's secret, there are concealed thoughts, which is like the unconscious, like Chochmah Stima, we learned. And then it even tells you there's even beyond that. But the beyond is already not comprehensible, it's more or less inaccessible. But you know the story reveals to you. Maven Dover, Metech Dover, like he said, from Yediyas HaChiyuv, by understanding something well, understanding wisdom well, you say, well, what is hidden wisdom? Whatever wisdom is, it's not that. So you learn from that, you can learn the so-called grandeur, as we said, the hafla, as he put it. That's Yediyas HaShlah. That's Arich. And then we come to the third interpretation, which is Sapir. What is Sapir really doing? What the first one is more the tangible number, more so-called structure of existence. And the story is like the interface that starts telling you there's a deeper story. Sapir now is starting to eliminate the veil. Starting to be able to create transparency. That instead of seeing, you could see this world and realize there's a power within the world. That's like the story. But whatever you start realizing, that not just realizing and perceiving there's a power within, you begin to really relate to it because the veil is starting to become transparent. So in Sipur, in Sapir itself, Sfira, Behirus, there's the levels where he begins. First, the containers reveal the energies. Then we go deeper, that the Pnimius HaKelim is real Sfira, Behirus, because Pnimius HaKelim are like translucent, like the eye, like a glass. So matter is now becoming more transparent. Matter is becoming more refined to the point that it can allow the energy through. It would be like an example, let's say, when you have a special spiritual experience. So your material world is less of a veil. This is what we say is Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yom Tov, Shabbos. These are days in the year or places in the world. You go to the Kaisel, for example. You go to a shul. What makes it holier? There's less veils. That's what it means. There are less garments and less containers that block it, or the containers are more refined and more translucent. Well, for example, when a person fasts, some people experience, I don't know if you've heard this, what they call the master cleanser. People go on this liquid diet. Master cleanser, it's called. It doesn't matter. Bottom line, when you fast, you drink only liquids for a few days, you'll see your body becomes light. It's like when you eat thick foods and all that, it weighs you down. Your kelim become grosser, bottom line. And there are times where a person is far more refined. So, for example, the human being itself, when you look at someone's toe or heel, you don't see much. You look at a face, chachmas adam te'er panav. A face is much more of a translucent container. It's matter, it's the same physical body. It's skin and eyes and a forehead and cheeks and all that. Yet, a glow can come through the face. You say the eyes are the window to the soul. The fingers are not. Because you could find examples where matter, the containers themselves, are becoming more refined. Then he moves from Primis HaKelim to Eir. He says, real brightness, you want to really see something clearly, you got to go straight into the energy itself. So now we're talking Sfira, the real meaning of Sfira Behirus, the third interpretation is in light, is in energy. And from energy he moves, not energy within Atzilus, within the containers, energy that's higher than Atzilus. The energy in the containers that are higher than Atzilus, like he calls them the engraved letters. Engraved letters are already an expression, but they're now made of the same substance of the energy itself. So if the stone is like the energy, the letters are made out of energy, not letters made out of ink, to use that example. And then he moves even further and says it's not the containers, even Sachkika are still letters. And in some ways still create a shadow. And they're still not the full expression of the stone, or in this case the energy. You want real pure energy, the purest, you got to go to the cloth itself, which is the backdrop, the canvas, which is a simple, clear, plain, shapeless, white light, white energy, which has not yet even been shaped into a letter. It has the potential for all letters. Anything can be made on it. It's like the infinite possibilities. And that is the level what he calls Atik. That's pure Ayr Atzmi. What's Atik? Atik is essentially as pure as it gets, but it's one step below the core. It's not the Etzim, because the Etzim you can't even define by that category. So even in psychology, many people think unconscious. If I get to the unconscious, I get to the real you. No, the real you is beyond unconscious. It's not even unconscious. You can't even call it a state of being in that sense. It's just who it is. So Eir Atzmi, the Atik, is still a levush. It's called Haid. Haid v'hadar lavashta. However, it's a levush only because anything outside of the core is already some type of garment. But in the world of revelation, it's pure revelation. It's pure energy. Whereas Hadar is already a step away from the pure energy, where the energy is already beginning to be expressed. Like he said, Berevam Hadas Melech, how the king is experienced by others, not his inner majesty. So there's the king himself, there's his majesty, his inner majesty is Atik Haid, there's the majesty as experienced by others and in details is Hadar, and that's still not yet 10 spheres. there will be rooted the 10 hidden spheres. So that becomes the Eir Pnimi, the Shadish of the Eir Pnimi is, as he put it, that is the canvas, that is the klaf. But it's already a state of Pnimi, and higher than that, as the end of the chapter, last chapter, is Eir HaBligvul Mamish. Shaloya Yedei Kelim, the Bechina Zula, the Bechina Sefer. And this as the fourth interpretation, the level of Sefer. I've still not gotten to the bottom of it, but meanwhile, Sefer and Sapir sound to me right here, based on what it says, as the same level. He does not distinguish between them. So we can speculate that the distinction, that why do you need two names, obviously. But meanwhile, he has not yet distinguished between them. But there is a fourth name, Sefer, referring to essentially the plain white cloth. Now, as I distinguish, klaf here is being used differently than 2 chapters ago. Here, it simply means, it's referring to, klaf here for all practical purposes could be the stone. He's not suggesting here written letters as opposed to engraved. He's suggesting here a state that is beyond any description, any manifestation of letters and so on. Okay.
It's like the shlemus, not shlemus, I don't know if that's a good word, but it's like the ultimate letter.
No, I would not use that word at all.
Why?
Because there are no letters. It's ultimate energy is the right way to put it. A letter is an expression. When you say a letter is an expression. Letter and keli are the same word. Osis and kelim are the same. It's the ultimate energy. I mean, an example for the whole thing would be, as I said many times, when you read a page, so there's a point where you see the letters, and you realize that they tell you an idea. There's a point you get so immersed in the idea that you don't even notice letters. In the deepest levels of thought, you're not realizing that you're thinking with letters, because the letters are so submerged in the idea that just the energy is flowing. So now, klaf is not letters at all. It's beyond any letter. There's just 2 levels in it. There's a level where it's just completely beyond anything, and it's like he says, sevel v'nesa v'sevel ha'esius. And then there's a level where it begins to become the beginning of the so-called the source for the 10 spheres and so on. It says clearly, klaf is Eir, the Eir Ein Sof. That's what he says clearly. So if you want to visualize it, you could think of it this way. Obviously, God doesn't need all this for His pleasure and for His creation. He wants to create a system that we can relate to. So we may never have an answer. We'll never have an answer why logic is logic. Why is logic that we know is logic like this way and not another way? But clearly that's also an expression of the divine essence. But he created in a way that makes sense. What makes sense? So just like an artist begins with first the artist, then comes all the infinite possibilities of different art, and then he envisions a certain particular piece of art. Then he takes a blank canvas and begins to draw on it. First he draws an outline, and then the details. So the same thing is here. There's a state where you have the white canvas, which is essentially the white field of energy. The plain field, the field of energy we talk about, is the canvas that God, you can say it's like the web. They call it in the imagery used in physics is like the string theory, where everything is like an invisible quilt. You know what a quilt is? Like an invisible blanket. Think of all of existence, one big field of energy, and everything we experience is like pieces on that energy. But the blanket is there, which means if someone moves the blanket, the whole existence is affected. It's not a bunch of particles. So imagine, you'd see a whole bunch of pieces, but you don't see that. They're all lying on something. So you see the pieces, but they're actually lying on a field of energy, and if the field of energy is moved, all the pieces move. So the world has an integral unity, which is essentially what's called Eir Ein Sof. Eir Ein Sof is the backdrop upon which all of other existence is created. This is actually a chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Talking about the Alter Rebbe, in 2 weeks is his 200th yahrzeit. So the Alter Rebbe in Samach Vav, he says, it's actually from the Tzemach Tzedek. It's one of the chiddushim of the Alter Rebbe in Eir Ein Sof. The Kabbalim all were grappling with what is the first step outside of Atzmos. And the best they came up with was Keser. And they debate whether Keser is Ein Sof or Keser is a Sefirah. And the Arizal reconciles it, says it's both. Atik is so-called is a reflection of Ein Sof, and Arich is a beginning of existence. And the Alter Rebbe there in Vayelech Samach Vav, he explains, the Alter Rebbe comes and adds a concept of Eir. Now the Eir exists in Kabbalah before, but not seen as such a vital component. It says Eir Ein Sof. In Eir Ein Sof, everything emerges. But Kesser is where things play itself out. And the Alter Rebbe added the idea that Eir Ein Sof is really the first state where everything plays itself out, and even including Kesser. So therefore, Eir Ein Sof, in its deepest level, is rooted in Atzmus itself. Eir is a real interface between Atzmus and existence. So the first step of Eir is Gilui. So ultimate Behirus, true revelation is that. Now why is it called Behirus? It said because compared to the source, it's already some form of expression, some form of manifestation would be maybe a better word. Atzmus never manifests. It's called not nitfas. So with that being said, that's what we finished learning chapter 123. And we continue now. Chapter 124, page Reishman. Now he's going back to a question that he asked in chapter 83, literally 41 chapters ago. Chapter 83, if you go there, he says, how could there be a schalkus of spheres of Keser Chachma Bina, the level of Bligvul? Chol Gilu al Yedei Sfiris. Go back to chapter Pei Gimel, bottom of page Kuf Nun Ches. It's very relevant here. Because here's now answering this question. So I'm going to read the question from there. So we'll have a real flow. Then, of course, is going to be the thing someone's going to ask, why do we need 41 chapters? Why didn't you just skip from 83 to 124? But, as we'll see... Huh?
If not, he would have had to ask another 100 questions.
Very correct. And we'll see very clearly why he had it to have. You'll see, that's why I summed it up. So let's go to the question. So before, if you look a little earlier, one second.
The real question is right here.
What's it?
Third line from the top.
Okay, I just want to point out, in chapter 80, people have been confused by this. A few people have asked me about this. In chapter 80, he asked the question, we find 10 spheres in Igulim. 10 spheres, Igul HaKesed, Igul HaChochmah, and so on. So that was a different question with a different explanation. Where he said that the truth is that there is a qualitative difference between one and the other. Here the question in chapter 83 is the big question, how there could be, so I'll read the question. Hashem is the kachab, Keser Chacham Bina, how is the l'cheri schalkus be'etzem adrigosan. So there's a distinction in their level, and we talked Bligvul, there's no distinction. The whole point of Bligvul is that there's no distinction. Since there's no distinctions, how could there be 10 spheres? Ayin, he says, the Beis, the Beis, an infinite divine light higher than the Tzimtzum, Shalamayla Messes Spheres Hagnuzis, higher than the 10 spheres, that also in the Eir Hablikvul, in the transcendent energy that is beyond structure, there's also spheres. Because it's already Eir V'Gili. It's some revelation. It's a critical line. Every revelation has to be through spheres. The only thing is that then there's no number to the spheres, but there's spheres. Dahainu, I'm reading back from page chapter 83. That even the spheres are also in a form of bligvul, without limit, without parameters. Being that the pshitus, meaning the seamlessness, the shapelessness, is the cause for the unlimited spheres. Like the Maimon, like it says, you're one, and not a measurable one, not accountable to Lefishu Chad Betzim, because he's fundamentally one. That's why the spheres are not the chuzman. So what he was saying, there's spheres, but there's no number, there's no structure, but there are spheres. So spheres themselves are in a form of shapelessness. And this is the big question. How could spheres be in a form of shapelessness? Seamless. The whole meaning of sphera, seemingly, is Hagbola, is parameters. It's Chachma Bina. How could it be a sphera that should be without a type of shape and structure? There's no more chairs? Yes. Huh? You're right? Okay, fine. And to explain this is the question on the table. So to explain this, to explain this, we have to understand Shem Sfira, and there come the 41 chapters that explain what Sfira is. Because clearly, up to that point in chapter 83, Sfira, we're not really clear what it means. What is it? Is Sfira a structure, or is Sfira lack of structure? So he says every gili comes from spheres. You already see he's setting up the answer. Every gili comes from spheres, but it's no number to spheres. So how is that possible? So that comes to teach us that sphere has a whole deeper meaning. And then he goes through the three explanations, that there's one meaning, number, and taka, that doesn't exist in Bligvul. The second meaning, story, and that also doesn't exist in Bligvul. But the third meaning, clarity and brightness, that does exist, because as we just learned, compared to the Etzem, the real revelation, where does Bilti Metzias Nimtza, a non-existential core essence of the divine, manifest? That's the first manifestation is going to be Eid HaBligvul. And that is where there are spheres, but sphere from the word Behirus, brightness. So therefore we did need an explanation, because we need to understand what spheres are on the lower levels, to understand what it means in its purest form. And that all comes to answer how there can be spheres, Igla Keser, Igla Chochmah. How can there be in a transcendent energy distinctions? Remember, transcendent energy is like Ratzon, desire. So when you speak about wisdom, when you speak about emotions, there's levels. There's Chesed, Gvura. There's in Chesed itself more love, less love. But when you speak about the level of desire, Ratzon is not measured. It has no gradations. Since there's no gradations, how do you say spheres? So clearly sphere has another meaning here. And clearly it's going to become, the meaning is going to be revelation. Gilui. Now what I wanted to make the distinction before was, in chapter 80, he also asked the question, aren't there 10 spheres in the Gulim? But there the answer was, and the question there was different. There he wasn't talking about actual spheres in an eagle. He was talking that there are levels. There's, for example, there's the Gulim of Keser, there's the Gulim of Chochmah, there's the Gulim of Ak, there's the Gulim of Bri, Yitzir, Nasiya. So he's not talking about that the Bligvul itself has levels. It's that there's levels within it all. And there he explained, because the truth is all those, the true distinction between things is defined by the hierarchy. By the hierarchy. And in Pnimi, in immanent energy, there's a fundamental difference between Chachma and Bina. But in Kesser, there's no real fundamental difference between the Kesser, the highest Kesser, and the lowest Kesser, because they're all dominant, transcendent energies. Just a matter of measure of quantity, but qualitatively they're the same level. In Primius, they're qualitatively the different levels. That's a different. Yeah, that's a Shtanzach. That's a different discussion. Here the question is, but we find spheres in the Igulim themselves. We say that in Kesser, in Eagle, there is Kesser, Chachma, Bina, and so on. So the answer is now coming out to the answer. That's why I wanted to go back Pei Gimel, because he says there, you see, all Kol Gili Halidei Sfiris. He read, and like Shasham Ein Mispel Sfiris, the Gili is in the form of Pshitis. But Gili means Sfira. Sfira means Gili. Sfira doesn't just mean number and story. The meaning of Sfira is Gili, and that answers the question. On the contrary, according to this, we'll understand Sfira and because on the contrary, according to the explanation that Sfira is, according to the definition of Sfira from the word brightness, Behirus, the primary brightness is where? Is specifically in the plain field of energy that has not yet been colored by anything. Where's the brightest form? Is the brightness itself is the brightest. Everything else is already a diminished level. Eir HaGvul, definitely Kalim, Pnimis HaKalim, they're already outside, they're not the pure reflection of the divine. They already are somewhat diluted and a hybrid. Now I should add, of course, the obvious question, what do you mean hybrid? Who made them hybrid? Don't they all come from God? But we have to go back again. Atzmus is beyond it all. To create existence, there's really two things going on. There's energy and there's containers. That's called energy is the divine expression, and containers is the identity and the personality of what God wants. So yes, of course everything comes from God, but the personality identity's focus is on the shape and parameters of that particular personality. So right now, for example, each of us sitting in this room, each of us has our unique individuality. That's exactly the way God made it. Ayin Day, Ayin Shabbos. No two people are created alike. I'm not talking about what we impose man-made problems or man-made distinction. I'm talking about how we're born. We're born differently. That's a good thing. But at the same time, we're created by the same force. So how is that possible? The answer is because God is not limited. He's as close to distinctions as he is to unity. He's neither defined by one, and he's not defined by many. He's beyond both. So he wanted both. So there's one energy that is a uniter, which is the commonality that we have, the mutuality that we share. And then there's the distinctions. So the highest source, the distinctions focus on the distinction. If we were all focusing on what connects us, we wouldn't be our individual selves. On the other hand, just individuals without a connector becomes chaos. Think of the human body. We have all the different organs and limbs. We have the 75 trillion cells and counting. I don't know if I got that number exactly, but there's an estimation, I guess. And then you have the captain of the ship, some coordinating force that's telling all the bodies, the healthy human being, they should all work together. So Kalim, or Koyach HaGvul, even though it's also a godly power, and in some ways rooted even deeper than Bligvul, but its focus is on a specific thing, not on the whole picture. Eira Bligvul is the first. If you want brightness in its purest form, you want to know divine energy in its purest sense of the word, you go, like he says, the legalis, to reveal everything that could be revealed, you have to go to Eira Bligvul. So where is real Sfira Behirus? The deepest meaning of it is in Eira Bligvul, in the infinite, shapeless, seamless energy. Shahu Bechinas Gilim in Etzem Mamish. Because that's a revelation straight from the core. You know, it would be interesting, psychologically speaking, what would a person look like if your core was revealed? Without any dilution, without any distortion, without any colors. What it would look like. Etzem HaNefesh. So the Etzem itself can never really be revealed. Etzem Einem is Gala, Einem is Pashut. But there is a dimension of expression that is as close as possible to the core. So the example Chassidus usually gives for this is a parent at a child's wedding. And another similar times when there's a certain deep simcha that just transcends all the regular structure of your containers. Now, I'm not talking about under the influence of any foreign substances. That always tends to to play around with the structure of things. But but there is a thing called Gili Etzem HaNefesh. I mean, by us we usually define in times of Mesiras Nefesh and things like that. But the bottom line is, there is that dimension. That's the purest expression of you. Frankly, it doesn't mean that it has to be expressed. It's not. It's meant to stay where it is. But it is as a dimension. It's the purest form. Everything else, that's the canvas upon which everything else will be painted and colored and written. The ink will come afterwards. Even the highest levels of the ink, meaning the first concept of letters or the first concept of expression. So you could think of it like an unconscious blanket, an unconscious quilt of energy, just a field of energy, which is the purest form of expression possible, and doesn't have any shape and form at that point. And then upon that will begin to emerge the other levels. Where do they come from? They obviously come from the source that also has the ability to create letters. But he gave us both. He didn't just create letters. Like I said, if God would have jumped and not created, if there was no Bli Gvul Eir, and we just jumped straight into Eir HaGvul and a structure, if the artist would go straight and create one painting, we would never be able to know and connect to God Himself. We would only have the God within the letter or within the painting or the structure that we know. The key here is that we have distinction. We each are individuals, but we can connect to something that's beyond individual, beyond the parameters. That's the purpose of this. And that's where real Sefirot, in the meaning from the word Behiris, from brightness, plays itself out. And this is the Sefirot that are in Eir Ein Sof. So Eir Ein Sof itself, obviously, is a field of energy, and there's no Sefirot altogether. But Sefirot in Eir Ein Sof is Ispashtus Ha'er. In that field of energy, there is Sefirot, meaning brightness. U'kanal being Heid v'Hodar, like we learned before about Heid v'Hodar. The Heid hu Etzem Ha'er. Heid is Etzem Ha'er. So there, right now, he's saying there's no Sefirot. Where the Sefirot in Eir is in Hodar. Here we go. V'Hodar b'chinas Ispashtus Ha'er, shu b'chinas Levush. And Hodar is already the extension of the energy. So now we have the core energy and we have its extension. Its extension, he's saying, is defined by Sefirot. Achu b'chinas Levush Eir. But it's not a levush like we spoke the other garments. The other garments we spoke about were lower than containers. They conceal. When you put on a coat or a jacket, you're concealing. You're concealing your body. You're protecting it from the cold. You're concealing it from others. Containers, on the other hand, are revealed as they conceal. Now we're talking about a levush that's higher than Eir. Why is it a levush? Because compared to the etzem, which is beyond revelation, you need something to express, like Eir Kesalma. So that's what this is. So this levush, this is a levush Eir. This is essentially a garment of light. A garment of light. Not a light that manifests in a garment. The garment is light. So God's garment is light. So the now garment takes on a whole different meaning. Right. The garment is light.
That's the faculties compared to the soul that's in the body?
I don't know.
That's the...
No, Psari Achzalakar, you mean Psari as in the faculties?
No, as a mashal for us to come to understand the garment.
So you ask me where that level is? Where the faculties are?
No, because you put rayas that...
The faculties are lower. Faculties are structure already. Faculties are the structure.
No, compared to this...
The earlier faculties were kalim, the kalim. So it's clearly that's not talking about. He's not even talking about the Eir in the kalim. He's not even talking about the power of the energies in the faculties. He's talking here energy in the soul itself before it even comes close to the faculties. We're not even talking faculties left. Here we're talking purely, that's why I said it's the core itself that is beginning to just manifest. That's what he's saying here. Let's put it this way. If you were able to visualize it, I just saw an expression from the Tzemach Tzedek and Derech Mitzvah, very interesting. He said that the best example for Eris and Kelim and Atzilus is Neshama and Guf, or Neshama and faculties. The soul is the energy, and it manifests in containers, which is the body or the faculties of the soul. He says there's only one difference is. In Eris and Kelim and Atzilus, the air can leave any time. Neshama cannot leave any time. And then he goes on, he says, but we could imagine that you could at will take your soul out of your body and out of the faculties whenever you want, and then you could bring it back. So then you could visualize what Atzilus looks like. Why am I saying this? Because if you're able to visualize this, I'm talking about conceptually visualize, visual concept, you'd see like this. you have to always begin with what we know most. This is a little methodology I'm going to share with you. To understand things well, to start talking about things you know nothing about, is usually the biggest mistake. Start with things you do know about, and then move your way from there. That's called extrapolation, because you're working with a point of reference. I often you see sometimes people say something, they explain something, they even repeat something they learned, and they may be brilliant. They may give you the mathematics of it, but then you realize, you start asking a few questions, they don't understand what they're saying. They're just repeating, and they have it perfect. Like they can tell you, there are people who can tell you exactly the map from Atzmus all the way to Asir Chumris because they know it. They know the mathematics of it. Just like there's some people know what a tzaddik beini in a Russia, and there's 10 kreiches and levushim. But imagine someone talking about, okay, there's a conscious guy, there's an unconscious, there's an unconscious, there's a tzaddik beini in Russia, there's lamatas malachas, and there's the B train and the C train and the number 1, 2, 3 train. All in one sentence. A lot of information, right? But anyone knows that put that all in one sentence is ridiculous. There's no one at all. Just a bunch of lists, like a grocery list. I don't know if you ever go shopping for your wives, but when you go a grocery list, like a woman knows the difference between one section and another. Man have to say, okay, where's this? And what section is it? You know what I'm saying? Perhaps it's technical like that. You know the difference between now a man and a woman scramble an egg? Make an egg? So a man, he has to make an egg, so what he does is he locks all the doors, shuts off the phone, and starts, making an egg, and then the first egg falls on the floor, and then finally then he turns it over and falls again. And the woman just has no problem. She makes an egg, she's on the phone, her baby is crying, she's multitasking, I don't know how I got off on a tangent. Maybe I'm hearing all the kids, so I'm just... But let's go back to the world that we're talking here. In other words, a woman is more Ayin Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, and a man is more the Kav. Edison Kalim. But the point I'm making here is that the first thing you have to begin with what you know. What we know is, on a very basic level, what we know that ostensibly we know what we tangibly know are the revealed conscious faculties. I have my hand here. Everybody sees my hand, right? I take a pen. I write a letter. What Chassidus is training us is how to go from what you know to what you know less, and understand it with the same clarity. That's the point. So the same clarity, okay, I write a letter. What is a letter? I write words. Words are ideas. Now ideas are harder to understand, because ideas are not so tangible. But you're climbing... Why am I saying this? Because the point I was making was that... what was the point I was making? Yeah. So if you're able to dissect it, what you see is the neshama in the body, all you know is that we're alive. You're walking, you're talking, you're breathing, you're moving. Clearly there's an energy force. Rahman al-Islam, God forbid, a corpse can't do any of that. Everything's there. The body, everything. Could be all intact. No damage even. But there's no energy in it. So the equivalent of a machine that has no what do we call? Has no
Motor.
What's another word for electricity? Buzz, not buzz.
Amps.
Juice. That's the word. No juice. So you can have a thing. The thing is inanimate. Then there's the juice. There's the energy in it. And if you continue on and say, so what does the soul look like when it's not energized? What does juice look like without the machine? We know what a machine looks like without the energy. We even know a machine looks like with energy. What does the energy look like without a machine? It's far harder to understand because we are machine people. We think things in very tangible, concrete forms. But that's why it's really hard to visualize energy. But you could visualize it because we see its effect on the machine. So clearly, what is it like in its purest form? In its purest form, it's basically not in any way diluted. Think of a teacher. You have a great teacher. You're in kindergarten. You're learning Aleph Beis. Okay, fine. You're grown. You now know words and ideas, and you know how to read. But you realize your teacher is far beyond you. What is the teacher's energy like on his own before he's teaching it to you? So clearly, he's definitely not having the examples. He doesn't need to bring it down. So if you can go to the pure, all the way to the source, to the mouth of the well, the source itself, what does energy look like there? That's what he's saying here. It's just a field of energy. It's undiluted. You can't call it chesed, you can't call it chachma bina and so on. What you call, say, it behirus. It's clear. And that itself, he says, there's two steps. Etzem ha'er really is just the concept of energy, to really put it. God has so-called manifested in existential terms, as opposed to non-existential terms. And then comes Gili, his pashtus ha'etzem. So he says, his pashtus shul b'chinas levush. But this is a levush made out of energy. So Megal says, "Lefishgam is pashtus subchinas gili ha'etzem," and even this pashtus is also a gili ha'etzem. Now you may say, so what's the difference between etzem itself and gili ha'etzem? I'm sorry, between etzem ha'er and his pashtus ha'er. So he discussed before, Heid and Hadar. One difference was the king in his own majesty, where he doesn't have any need or any connection to anything outside of himself. Hadar is already details, Hidur, Revam Hadash Melech. It manifests, it's expressed. There's a nation, they're crowning him. They stand in awe of him, etc. And he continued, that's Atik and Arich. One you access through Yediyas HaShlila. That's the lower level, is Pashtus. The Etzem is beyond that. Now you could say, well, how do we know there's an Etzem? Why don't we just jump from his Pashtus to Etzem itself, Etzem Ha'er? Because as I said, just like we know, conscious tells you there's an unconscious tells you there's an unconscious. So if there's an expression of majesty, you have to know there's a majesty that's beyond expression. So right now, when we say Sefirot, Behirus, clarity, we're talking here, Hadar, not Hoid. Which is interesting. Yeah, we're not talking about the pure cloth. You're not talking about the pure parchment. You're talking already a parchment that's manifesting itself as some form of expression. You can't really envision it in cloth, because parchment is just parchment. That's what he's saying right now. Okay, so here's where there's Sefirot. And because it's a Spashtus, it's an extension, that's why it's possible to say Sefirot there. That means the revelation of energy, which is the idea of Sefirot. And this needs a little explanation, because once we could argue, 1 second, isn't Etzem Ha'er also a lavush from the core Atzmos? So why is that not Sefirot? Because there's no revelation there, that's why. So in other words, what are we talking about here? I'm trying to give a visualization of this.
There's no revelation on the parchment either, right?
Right, 1 second. Etzem Ha'er is Pasha said, I gave the example yesterday, let's just use the example of the sun. There's the sun itself. There's the light of the sun that extends from the sun, which reaches us, which ultimately reaches us. And there's the sunlight within the sun. Now you have to say, like he says in Shayach Damona, if light is reaching us, extending to us, you have to say within the core there's light. Or else where is it coming from? But is the light in the core of the sun similar to the light that extends from the sun? The answer is no. Not only in intensity and in quantity. It's a fundamentally different level. Like when you say the sun has the power to create, to emanate light. It's a whole different thing than saying that there's sunlight, that we feeling warmth on our skin when the sun touches us, or we see the daylight when the sun rises. What does it mean? It means the sun has something called a power to give off light. And in its first level, it's already not the sun, because the sun is a body. The sun is an actual body. Light is going to extend from it. So Etzem Ha'er is essentially the place where the core meets, or the interface between the core and the expression of the core. So there's what's called the Etzem. It's already a revelation, but it's not yet an extension. I'm trying to find a few other examples. There must be good examples for this. Let me think for a second. I mean, in Seichel, the example would be when you sit down to try to perceive something, there's really a few stages going on here. One is that your mindset is one, I'm now going to try to concentrate on something. But you haven't yet concentrated. Even to yourself, I'm talking about. Then you begin to study it. That's already some type of an extension. And then when you get to communicate it to someone else, it's even a further extension. My point is that there is a state of Etzem Ha'er before it becomes an extension or an expression. So we're basically saying that there's Etzem is the core Atzmos, that's beyond it all. Then there's Etzem Ha'er, the mere fact. I'm looking back in the previous chapter how he says, It's almost like, I think it's almost, you could almost say it's the koyach hagili. It's like the power of God to reveal whatever He wants to reveal. That's like the etzem ha'er. And the Hispashtus is when He's beginning to actually manifest in a form of expression. Yeah. It's a very subtle level, but it's a critical component, critical level. It's not the soul itself in the human being, and it's not the expression of the soul. We're not even talking about the faculties now. Everyone gets it?
That's what it wants me. It's not the expression of the soul?
No.
Like in between, so to speak.
It's like the light inside the sun. Is the soul getting? Let's put it this way: you can't get to the expression without. Earlier, a while back, he explained it in cognitive terms as following. He says there's conscious cognitive skill, conscious awareness. Then there is, I call it unconscious. You can call it whatever word you want, chachmas tima, which is the source of your mind, your intellect. But it's a source. Then there's a level that you can't even call a source. He says you can't even call it makar ha-seichel. He said that clearly. Why? Because it's how seichel is in the soul. What does it look like? I'm not saying it's an exact example, but that would be an example where one thing is already an expression and it's just not revealed yet. And the other is not even an expression, but it's the power of intelligence within your soul. Then that manifests in, let's call it an unconscious, a collective unconscious, and that in turn seeps in, and a drop comes in. That's chachma gluya, when you have an idea enter your mind. So there is that. There's like this is what he's calling etzem ha'er hispashtus ha'er. Look, this trust me, in Chassidish classes over the years, sometimes hours and hours, if not days and days, if not months, to understand the difference between etzem ha'er and hispashtus ha'er. Because we're not even talking now 10 spheres. There are many, many examples for it. Klaf is the pure klaf, the pure white light. Maybe another example for it is not exactly, but I'll give the example he gave earlier. Remember he spoke about that there's a state of no colors altogether? There's a state of colors, and there's a state that's ein gevin legevin, between color and no color. And that's white. Clear white, transparent, is a state between the two. So let me ask you, so what does it look like, a thing that's completely beyond color? The answer is, we have no idea, because you can't even talk about it. White, you could say, okay, it's not a red or blue. It's plain, it's vanilla, it's clear, it's transparent, but it's transparent. The reason I hesitate to use the example, because there, he was talking earlier that love on there is chochmah. And beyond love and beyond white is keser. But the truth is, now that he's talking that pure brightness, Sefirot is the highest levels. Yeah, you could say love on, okay, that, you could say the highest level, actually you could say it. That arich would be, hadar would be color white, it's a plain color, and the level before that you can't even call a color. Mm-hmm. So that's the state. For all practical purposes, to make things easier, I would call it right now conceptual light as opposed to actual light. Conceptual energy as opposed to actual. Even though God doesn't need all these things, but let's put it this way, He needed to conceive of the concept of being revealed before He actually starts revealing Himself. Because remember, He doesn't need revelation, so He needs to will it. The will is first the concept. So in anything, you can always talk about the concept. Let's say in mathematics, mathematics is the concept of numbers, and then there's the number. There is a concept of something. And if you don't have the concept, if you're in a state of being that's completely not in your realm, you don't even have the concept in your mind, you're definitely not going to get there.
Like the formula?
No, concept is not formula. Not formula at all. A conceptual, it's called conceptual numbers. Theoretical, conceptual light as opposed to actual light.
Seed?
No. We're higher than the seed. We have to go into a place that's beyond the seed. A seed is already just a matter. A seed is arich, not more than arich. Because a seed is just a matter of time, and you'll see it's just a matter of understanding the seed. Yeah. What you talk about a second before the seed? The reason this is hard is because we do not exist on these levels. You see, I told you, we exist on tangible levels. It's hard enough to figure out what a seed is, let alone a second before the seed. Can you relate to your neshama, the soul, before it comes down into our body? Before the moment of conception, what was the soul like? So these things are harder to understand. Let's continue. We'll be discussing it many times. Let's just see what he says. But gave some examples. Hopefully it was helpful to some extent. The key is, do not use your regular or conventional tools, or else you're doomed here. You have to remember, we think things are always in terms of tangible, and we travel to the intangible. Here you're talking about something that's beyond anything, and traveling now into becoming something. So, we say yesh ma'ayin. Why is it yesh ma'ayin? Is it nothing? No. Because we think this is something, and for us, that's nothingness. But if you want to think of it from that perspective, that's everything, and we're nothingness. So, what does that look like? Remember, he said even you can't get there. So think of it like this. There are things we know. There are things we know that we don't know. And there are things we don't know we don't know. That's what we're talking about. The things we don't know we don't know. Because as soon as you know you don't know it, it's already Yidiyas HaShlir, that's Arich. You've come from your knowledge, you've come to understand there's something beyond my knowledge. But what happens, you come to a point that's beyond your knowledge.
We don't know, but we can still talk about it.
We are. Yeah, we're talking about it. We're realizing that we are a very small little... one of the examples, I remember one of the first examples I heard from Rabbi in understanding, we spoke about how do you understand levels of Ein Sof. Either it's Bligvul or it's not Bligvul. So he repeated what he heard from older Chassidim when he was a student. So the example they say, Rabbi Hillel said that Rabbi Hillel is infinitely distant from a cat. But compared to the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Hillel and the cat are equal. So what do you have? Levels in infinity here, right? So the example they gave is the example from Numbers. It's actually a very powerful example, so I'll use it here because I think it could help. And you'll see we could talk about it and still realize how far it is from us. So there's a thing called the set of finite numbers, and there's a set of infinite numbers. It's an actual mathematical concept. What's finite numbers? It's the numbers we know, misper. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tell me, where's the set of finite numbers end? There's no end. Because there's no last number. There's no place where finite jumps into infinite. Compared to the infinite set of numbers in mathematics, it's a sideway 8. Okay? Compared to the infinite 1 and a trillion and trillion, and as far as you can go. Technically, you can sit right now and start writing 1.11111, and the only thing that will stop you is if you run out of ink or you run out of life. Yeah. So you can go forever. That's a finite set of numbers. It never will go suddenly, you're going to hit infinite. Which means that from the perspective of the infinite, 1 and the trillion are equal. Why are they equal? Because trillion are a bunch of ones. They're just a lot of ones. Infinite is infinite. It's a completely qualitatively different jump. Okay. But here's the question. If you asked infinity, you said, tell me, are numbers relevant to you? Do you reckon with them? Are they proportionate to you? Infinity would say, depends what you're asking me. If you tell me 1 and 2, 3, 4, no, they're all equal to me. But the concept of numbers, yeah, because I'm also a number. I just happen to be an infinite number. So in other words, the weakness or the lack, you could say the deficiency of a finite number compared to an infinite is what it's not. It's lacking infinity. It's a finite, not an infinite. But what it is. Infinity cannot say that finite numbers don't exist. It could say finite numbers are meaningless to me because their number is very small compared to myself. Now let's talk about not numbers. Let's talk about love. Ask love. Tell me, what do you think about numbers 1, 2, 3? Love will say, I don't really know what it is. Does it mean anything to you? No, because it's not even in the world of numbers. So what the Chassidim would say, how they explained it, would be like this. So what's lacking in the 1 and 2, 3 is not just what it's not, but even what it is has no value. So here you have two levels of so-called enarech, two levels of distance. One, there's distance between two things, and it's infinitely distant, but you cannot say that what it is, it's not. You can't say its value is no value. In its world, it has value. Then there's a level where even what it is meaningless. So when you talk about yes, it's infinite compared to the infinite possibilities in an artist to create one part of art. You ask him, this one piece of art you made, what is it compared to what you are like an artist? He'll say, I can create infinite amounts. But he cannot say that this piece of art has no value, because it's coming from an artist. But what about if you go into the artist and say, the level that he's not even an artist yet, the level that he's a husband, a father, a human being, a Jew, whatever. And I say to him, what do you think about this one piece? He says, one piece of art, it's meaningless to me. Not because I can create infinite, because even what it is, I don't know, it's meaningless. It's completely valueless. Even what it is has no value. So that's a level that is beyond. Now, can we talk about it? Yeah, I just gave you an example. But even Yediyas HaShlila, infinite Yediyas HaShlila. Infinite, you could say, I don't know what infinity is, but I know what finite is. By extrapolation, I figure out infinite is not finite. But to go to a world that doesn't even recognize infinite or finite, that says to you, infinite and finite are equal to me, and not only equal to me, they have no value, even what they are. That's almost impossible for us to comprehend. All we can do is really imagine it. But the fact is, God created us. Atzmus created us, so we are able to imagine that too. That's why we talk about Atik. You could ask a question. You just said Atik is Yediyas, so why are we talking about it? The answer is, number one is that the Torah revealed, Atzmus himself revealed it to us, and number two, you can't talk about it directly, but ultimately you could. When Moshe asked God, show me your face, what God said, I'll show you my back. We see neither of the two. Because even the back was a big chiddush, right? So what do we see? Because the back was like arich. Hashem said, I can't show you my face, but I'll show you my back. I'll show you something that's infinite beyond you, but you can comprehend it through shlila. Then Atik is beyond that altogether. Even though we learn Pani Layaro, also that can be achieved by not looking. But that's even more than not looking like Shlila. Yediyas HaShlila is still a process. Like you could say, you know what? I'm going to learn a subject matter. I'm going to count 49 days, and then I'm going to come to realize the 50th I can't count, but now I can relate to it because I did the 49 steps. Then there comes a 51st. We can't even relate to then. How do you get that? So there it is. Back to Avodah, back to davening. No escape. Yeah. And just giving some examples, there are many, many more, but the beauty of these exercises is really, as I said yesterday, I say it again and again, Chassidus is coming us to train to think differently, and therefore to speak differently and to act differently. If we really relate it to some of what we're discussing now, trust me, Lashon Hara and pettiness and the stupid things we're involved with have to become less important. Simple as that, because you're talking reality here. You're talking about brightness. You want to know reality? Go into Etzem Eir. So next time someone comes over and says to you, listen, I read something on COL and it's bothering me or something, say, listen, let's talk a little about Etzem Eir, and I guarantee it won't bother you so much. So you have to start seeing this as reality, and that as what it's for, nuisance, nonsense. Now I understand tzadid b'tachtein, we have to also refine that level. But let's first start on this level. I feel cleansed when I read this. It's very pure. What do you think, Eliezer? No?
Liquid diet.
It's far purer than most of. For that alone, it's worth it.
It's only wicked because we can still go to show and talk about sports.
Okay, fine. So you remind me of the story that I said from Yisrael Nevler, where a bunch of guys a few months ago called me. They want to bring. What time? Okay, 11:30 will come. I said, what are you going to do till 11:30? We're going to go get some pizza. We have a few other things to do, and then we're going to come for drink. Not that I'm against pizza, but it was interesting the so-called schedule. So Yisrael Nevler, I told them. They said Yisrael Nevler. I told them I'll give you a fabring right now on the phone. You don't even have to come here. Yisrael Nevler, I heard this from Yisrael Friedman. He heard it in Poking from Yisrael Nevler. Yisrael Nevler was a Chassidish Yid, sharp Yid, very sharp. So the Rebbe Rashab once told him that he should stay up Thursday nights to learn. So there's a Mishmer night to stay up. Okay, the Rebbe says to stay up, he's up. But sometimes it's a long night, you get tired. So what he would do sometimes Thursday afternoon, he would prepare by lying down and taking a nap. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe took meticulous attendance of who went to Temchet Mim. So, and he used to go review it with the Rebbe Rashab, and they see Rishol is every few Thursdays he's not around. So the Rebbe Rashab called him in and said, "My hi, what's going on?" So he said, "The Rebbe the Rebbe said it's just to be up at night Thursday night. So sometimes you have to make chachanas, So the Rebbe Rashab says, "Was meinst du? As from schlafen kann man kommen zu nicht schlafen." That's what he said. What do you think? That from sleeping you can come to not sleeping? So I told him, from eating pizza you're going to come to verbringen. That's not going to work. The Gerer Rebbe, I don't know, so compare it all, but there's in Yerushalayim, there was there's the Skrepa of a Rebbe in the Meir Sharim, and he was known for making excellent beblach. You know what beblach are? Beans. This was his. Every Rebbe has his power, has his unique. So his beblach. So he made very good beblach. These type of beans, and Friday night they were especially good because they were warm still and they were well cooked and all that. So some bochum would come back from the Kosel, they would stop by him and eat beblach, ate these beans, and then they'd go on to some Gerer Rebbe's tish table. So they came onto the table, and one of them burped at the table, because he ate so many beblach, he burped. Yeah, so the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek said, the Gerer said to him, the Gerer Rebbe says, "Beblach es du beim Skrepever, und grebtzen kommst du da." The beblach, the beans you eat by the Skrepever, and here you come to burp. You get the visualization of it. Now, all on spiritual levels, I don't know the difference between beblach and burping, but I don't know. I don't think it's etzmeir as Pasha said. That I can tell you.
Most of us have bodily needs. We need to rest a little bit.
That's fine, but you don't get the word.
I get
Okay.
the word, but I don't get why you tell this guy who needs to take a nap. It's like mocking him his level. I don't know.
He took it in strides. He took it well. He took it well.
So he changed that. He was superhuman.
If the Rebbe tells you to stay up, it doesn't mean that you should sleep. It's not right. He's telling you, "I'm giving you the power to stay up." I'm not telling you to sleep another. It's like you push the doll down here, it pops up here. It's
But I didn't get you strength to do it. That I know.
Anyway, so Etzemeir is Pasha Sa'ed. If anybody has any examples you want to bring to the table, this is meant to be a forum. Hopefully I'll put up online summaries of this. But look, it's good. As I said yesterday, if this causes you frustration, you're in a good place. It means you're beginning to feel tense. If you feel it's all comfortably, easily, guaranteed you're not understanding it. So the first thing is to know that Etzemeir is Pasha Sa'ed itself is pretty hard to understand. Etzemeir is almost impossible to understand. But you can understand it through extrapolation. That's what I'm saying. Think about it. I told you, go work backwards. You know your soul's impact on you. Now try to figure out what the soul is like on its own. See how far you can go. And you see where you get. And it's a process. I'm not, we don't have to master this. It's not about mastering. This is about submitting ourselves to it. And allowing it to emerge. That's the key. Even that is not what we're used to.
Once Gary was about the refrigerator, he asks him,
Yeah.
where do you go after?
And Shluva.
I think it's similar. Extrapolation is similar.
It's a little bit more. It must be.
I don't know the word. I use extrapolate and no. There's the shlila of shlila. That's what I meant.
Where do you go after you get this?
It's extrapolation of extrapolation, like that. Huh?
The refrigerator asks the electricity, where do you go after?
Yeah. That's a common one. People ask me often. I've said this many times. Where does the soul go after 120 years? The question, the big question. And I always say that the whole question is based on an arrogant assumption. The assumption is you are where it's at, so you wonder where the soul goes. Maybe it's the other way around. And I use the imaginary dialogue between a refrigerator and electricity. When the refrigerator asks the electricity, "Where do you go when they pull the plug?" And the electricity responds to the refrigerator, "What kind of arrogant question? Where you came from? Your little box they just invented 100, 200 years ago. They confined me inside this box to refrigerate food. Now you ask me where I go? I go where I always was. Where did you come from? You're the shmendrik. You're the new guy on the block. because of the Ingel Atzutzik, Atzutzik, the little child. I go back where I always was. I wasn't confined by the time and space as you understand it, but you'll never get because you only know your box. I've said this to so many crowds, no matter who, believer, non-believer, secular, everybody relates to it. So as soon as you say it, they right away get it. Because everyone says that's exactly right. What would a box say to electricity? And what will electricity say to a box? You suddenly realize we know very little. We know a very small picture.
And the real question is coming from above.
I don't know what that means, what you just said. I said what I said. I'm saying that the box can't tell you what electricity is like. Where the box came from.
Yeah, how do we get it from?
What difference does it make? But one thing's for sure, we're definitely not, electricity preceded us. Of course.
One of the difficulties I have with this sort of stuff is that it seems to me that whenever you have a contradiction which comes an impossibility, they start looking for an explanation. What he seems to do is he explains phenomena, bridging phenomena, and shows that this is and this and this and this is. There's never actually an address of the question of causation or how things actually happen. There's never a dynamic of causation. It's always a description of phenomena at different levels. And therefore, when you have a problem, well, there's something between, and you redefine it, you make finer division, and finer refinement, like you said, with the super, super, and so on and so forth. So when you have this sort of contradiction, so you say, this is this, then you get an impossibility and contradiction there. So you make another subsequent division. So at all times, what you're therefore doing, you're actually describing phenomena, but you're not really describing an actual act of causation, the mechanism of how it actually happens. And at no point is that these sort of actually extrapolate to somewhere else. Can I take another thing of it? One of the things that when I've sort of struggled with this question I'm asking is when I look at this question about the Moichin and the Cyrus, so to speak.
Moichin and Cyrus.
Yeah. We know that the Cyrus is the thing. Now, I take from a physiological point of view. We know that there's a connection with Moichin and Cyrus. We know, for example, if someone has a stroke up on its own, the hairs from that part of the body will fall out. Now, how the actual connection is nobody really quite knows, because there isn't really a neurological condition, and there isn't really a hormonal condition. So the point is that there are some sort of mechanisms, however, that seem to be, but we can't really define them. And what research tries to find the mechanisms of how you transform from the anaerobic to the aerobic, and that's what a lot of research is trying to do. But we never do that. We never actually make that. I haven't found whatever. So how you actually make this transition from the anaerobic to the aerobic in a way, in a mechanism that makes it actually, so that all you do is when you get to difficulty, you actually split it again and make another. This is this. So then the question still comes out, how does it happen? You don't. Psychostasia does it. Okay, but then we never really actually funded it.
I hear your question loud and clear, and I'm sad to hear that's your experience. My experience is otherwise. I think Chassidus is not meant just to give you another level.
I'm just asking
No. I'm saying what you're saying is accurate. The way it's learned is very much like you just described. There's another level, and you never hear the process of how one level draws into the next or extends into the next. The process, the causation.
You describe the properties of this level, this level.
Exactly. I'm saying.
Therefore, this causes it, but that's a different question.
Hold on. So I'm responding to you. I'm saying to you is I agree with you. That's the way it's taught, but that's not the way it's written. The whole point of understanding these new levels is to understand causation. It's to understand how to draw from there. So when you, for example, in this case where he says there's Sefirot in Bligvul, and then establishes, yes, Sefirot has another meaning called brightness. And the goal of this, and this may be what we call Avodah, is now how do you draw from the brightness into, how do you draw from the, let's call it what he's calling here, the shapelessness into shape. So that's absolutely causation. I would say that's Avodah Chassidus. And unfortunately, Haskalah of Chassidus is taught the way you described it, more like a map. Here's this. But let's be honest. I mean, any science, first you learn the map, and then you learn the causation.
But then you look for a frame of reference, which actually links it.
Okay, but I'm saying to you, but we don't have to be stuck there. I'm going to give you an example of causation in this discussion.
Okay.
And I think in every discussion, everyone understands what he's talking about. Yeah. So it's easy to say, okay, there's Asiya, Bri, Yetzirah, Atzilus, 10 spheres, higher, Bligvul, Eir, Sov, Poshet, Etzem, is Pashtus Seir. Now the question is, yeah. Now the question is, why are we being told this? Let's start with that. The Rebbe Rashab did not waste his thousands of hours writing this because he was just he had nothing to do with his quill, and he needed to paint some paintings, right? He wrote this as a blueprint for life. This is to me, an axiom before we even open the book. So if this is a blueprint for life, it has to be causation related. It has to be, what do you do with this now? So first, any line we learn, and this is, like I said, it's a tragedy that in yeshiva they didn't teach. First of all, they didn't even teach us how to understand it in any relevant terms. That's the first problem. Then, most importantly, they never taught it in a way how to understand it as a blueprint. How do you follow that? At best, you know some mechanics. That's what you're asking. So I will say to you, that's the critical way of learning this. So that's the goal. So I'll give you an example. The causation now. Let's talk about the causation. So the first thing we need to do is, we're talking here of the highest possible levels. So right away we're dealing with a reality that's almost impossible to really discuss in any type of intimate detail, because whatever we know is only what he tells us. Okay, so that's where I'm going to now. So let's bring it down to something we can talk about, and I'll show you how I see the causation, and you tell me if it satisfies what you're asking. One of the examples he keeps using is the idea of how ideas become manifest, how ideas become tangible. That's one example. Abstract ideas are in our mind, and then they become shaped by words and letters, and we can actually communicate them. You can teach it to someone. That's one of the things he speaks about. So he speaks about all the levels of it, how it's in the furthest, or the most simple expression to, let's say, a child, all the way to the way it is in the essence of the mind of the teacher. Or many, many, many levels. All these levels you can apply to that. There's Etzem Ha'er, there's Hayd and Hadar, there's Etzem Ha'er, Pashas Ha'er, and then there's the Eiris and the Kalim and Atzilas, Bria, the whole picture. That's one example he uses in understanding all of this. Okay, fine. So I want to use that example because I think that example we can talk about. And let's use it as is there a blueprint here? Now that we know all these levels, what can we do with it? How could it help us improve our lives? Let's start with communication itself. So what is the process? How, from a type of so-called abstract place, let's call it a collective unconsciousness, suddenly an idea called chachma falls into your head. It could happen in the shower, it could happen right now, it could happen thousands of times a day. And that chachma then turns into bina, they develop it, or let's say 1 out of 1,000 maybe develops into a fleshed out, until it can actually become an idea that's put down on paper. You can even make a business plan and build a business that makes millions or billions of dollars, like a Google. It started with a concept. It started with an idea. I'm not getting now into the mazel of it and that stuff. Idea that, did it change the world? I mean, it changed the world in one way. You want to take Einstein. Maybe it's a better example, because that's like physics that's actually changed scientific theory. Take the Alter Rebbe. I mean, whoever you want to take someone who changed the world in some way. They went through this process. Now, most people say this type of process is complete, either grace of God or luck. That Henry Ford came up with the idea of a car, or that Einstein this was just a stroke of luck or a stroke of whatever chance. Now, besides the fact that people of faith will say there's hashgacha pratis, nothing is just by chance. Secondly, everyone knows nothing just happens. Even if you needed mazel, but they also did something. Einstein did develop a theory. He didn't just sit and then do nothing. He developed a theory, worked on it, and then presented it. So we have to assume, and I'm not just assuming, I'm taking this as a given, that the creative process from the deepest unconscious to actual action can be is a formula. There's a formula for it, and when you follow the formula, you can actually replicate and create causation, as you put it, where you actually can you can stimulate the deepest unconscious level. Well, it will generate energy, and that energy will start flowing through. Now, in this actual page here, he doesn't yet talk about the causation. I would call that the Avodah. But I'm going to give you an example which is related to this discussion. And I'm glad you're asking it, because it's a good challenge and it's very important that we discuss it. I just want to say that even if he doesn't discuss it on this page, to me it's a given that's where he's going. All this has to be relevant to us to be able to replicate. There's no different than a scientific experiment. If this cannot be replicated in our lives, it's frankly meaningless. What do you mean replicated? Not to discover the levels. That there's knowing that there's a Eir HaBligvul and Eir HaGvul changes my life. If it doesn't change my life, there's no way I could relate. There's no way that the Alter Rebbe and all the Rabbeim came to give us all this without helping us change our lives. Why would they teach it to us? It's not just to keep our minds busy with other spiritual things so we shouldn't get into trouble, even though that's also a good objective. But it has to be a blueprint. So here's an example. I've used this with secular people. And obviously, this requires, in my opinion, a serious work. This is a life work. This is a magnum opus. I'll just say as an aside, I'm of the belief, the Pnimis HaTeira was Nizgala just recently, relatively. It's a few hundred years. Arizal, but let's consider this Chabad, 7 generations. Not a lot of time. It's 200 years since the Alter Rebbe. 200 years in the scheme of things is pretty small. If you compare it to Nigla, what is 7 generations from the time Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi compiled the Mishnayos? 7 generations is basically Chsimis HaShas. It's when Shas ended. It's the 7 generations of Tanoim and Amoraim. There was no Rashi, there was no Tosfos, there was no Rishonim, no Achreinim, no codifiers, no Rambam. How would we learn Torah if we were now 7 generations from the time of Shas? You'd have to either be a genius, one of these top scholars. You definitely would not be understand it the way we understand. I mean, they understood things, I guess. They understood what Rashi writes without Rashi. Chassidus is in that type of infancy. Chassidus is meant to be a taste, an appetizer of what we're going to learn when Mashiach comes. We happen to get 7 generation appetizer. That's the difference. So we're at a stage where there's no Rashi, there's no Rambam, there's no Rishonim, no Achreinim. We have raw doctrine of 7 generations that has not yet been turned into a blueprint. Halach has been turned into a blueprint. It may be lacking the neshama without Pnimis HaTeira, but it's a blueprint. You have hundreds of thousands of frum Jews following this blueprint to the crazy detail. Let's not use the word crazy. Obsessive detail of every shir and mitzvah that everyone's doing, not even necessarily knowing why. It's a whole system that's been codified, called Shulchan Aruch and so on. And we down to the arguments that we all have about it. Chassidus is not even close. No one's even arguing about Chassidus nuances because it hasn't even been exposed to 7 generations of raw doctrine, literally like Mishnah and Gemara, without anything else. Now I go back to that plank. So that's why I think what you're asking has not been done because very few take it that seriously. And secondly, most people don't have the tools and skills to apply it. I've told this to you when we met the first time in Melbourne. I said, people in the world of psychology.
Neuropsychology, yes.
Huh?
You have to get a neuropsychologist to find Sholem.
Exactly, and the physicists and the other scientists. So now I'm going to take one strong example. Yes, I'm going to take one. Exactly what we talked about 15 years ago, right?
20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Right. Okay. Is that long?
That was in 1975.
Who's counting? Well, in the scheme of things, 1975 is what? 1975, 30 years ago. Okay, so it's 30 years closer to the Alter Rebbe, basically. So 170 years from the Alter Rebbe? Yeah.
You guys are going on 40.
Okay, 40 years. So basically 160 years from the Alter Rebbe's Yahrzeit, and now 200 years. Okay. It's like things are moving very slowly. The Rabbi is rolling along. So anyway, but I want to say the following. I'm going to give one example that's related, and I think it's very related here. And I'm using now a little Samach Vav and Ayin Beis mixed because they speak about it. Earlier he spoke about these 2 levels of Atik and Arich. He explains in the words of Helam Sheyeshnu b'Mitzias, Helam She'enu b'Mitzias. Then he talks about the Sipur, revealing the inner story. So he says like this. The example is the Tzura Chalamish, which is the flintstone, and the Shalhevis and the Gachelis, the coal, the hot coal. So a hot coal, you look at it, it's hot, have no clue. It looks white. For all you know, it's just a plain. But when you fan it, you immediately see. If you touch it, God forbid, you're going to get burnt. A flintstone, you throw it in water, the coal will extinguish. A flintstone has a spark within it. You touch it, there's no heat. You throw it in water, it doesn't extinguish. So he explains this is Helam Sheyeshnu b'Mitzias, Helam She'enu b'Mitzias. Helam Sheyeshnu b'Mitzias means coal that is alive and flaming is revealed, is conscious. The unconscious is so-called the coal that is there, but it's concealed from your eye. You just need to fan it. And then there's a state within I guess the psyche and the soul that is a potential state. The spark is there, but you need something to release it. So he says in Samach Vav, what are the 2 methods to release the inner spark that is in the unconscious, the Helam Shein Mitzis. He says one is Yigia, and the second is Kabbalah Soil. One is exertion, like striking the stone. How do you get a spark out of the flintstone? You got to strike it. That's what he compares to Moshe hitting the stone the first time, and compares to this also to Shviras Haluchas, breaking of the tablets, which brought the second tablets. And he asked, how could the second tablet be higher than the first? They brought us Shas, the whole Talmud and everything. Chet and Nisker, that a sinner is rewarded. So he explains the whole mile of Tshuva, that it's breaking the stone. So exertion, when a person sits, and this is the whole big yisod in Ayin Samach Vav, Yigiyah, when you break your head in trying to learn something, you're breaking the stone. You can release an unconscious energy that would never be able to be released if you were just, what to call it, floating, smoothly. So we're not floating, cruising, exactly, cruising. The second thing he says is Kabbalah Seil. When a person does something that he doesn't want to do, that also opens up the unconscious channels. So let's apply this to causation by learning that there is a Helam Shein, which is, like he says, learning there's a Hoid, not just a Hadar. You're not just learning another level. You're learning that even if your so-called unconscious state is not accessible, whatever, let's say it's been damaged in some way. Let's say a person's been hurt. Let's talk a little psychology. Somebody's been hurt in life. They went through a terrible divorce. They grew up in an abusive home. And at this point, they don't want to go into a relationship because they've been hurt. So what do you want to teach them? You want to teach them that there's a deeper place within them that's not been hurt. And if you can access it and allow it to nurture you, it can compensate for some of the lack of nurturing you may have gotten on other levels. So what we're taking now is we take from a level of understanding a new level. He's not just sticking in, who cares with this Sefirot and Bli Gvul? Who cares? That makes a difference. Who cares with this Sefirot and Bli Gvul? There's a reason. Because if there's Sefirot and Bli Gvul, means that I can access it. If there were no Sefirot and Bli Gvul, it would be a domain that's inaccessible. It's God's domain. Fine, God can create Bli Gvul, He does whatever He wants. I can access it because it's Sefirot and I have Sefirot in me. So even my number, even Sefirot as a number, can access the story. Here's another example. Just amazing. I told the story about the story. So we talked about, the story about what's the power of a Chassidish story. Or a power of a Chassidish Nigun. We all know song has power. But what's really the power of song? Look, today's generation. Song today is, in my opinion, has replaced religion. A rock concert is a cathedral. Rock stars, music stars, pop stars are priests. Grateful Dead may be embodied at most. And they even brought the incense and offerings of different sorts, right? Why? Because music is the language of the soul. Music is the language of the soul. And if you want to use it well, it can actually be a healing force. What does it do? It accesses the unconscious. It accesses forces that are the Helam Sheyesh Mitzias, the Helam She'enu B'Mitzias, Hayd and Had that I'm saying here, and you can draw them out. Now, the reason I used the example of the story, but I said before with the story was, they tell the story, by the time the Baal Shem Tov, he had a custom that he would go before Rosh Hashanah, light a fire in a certain field, say a prayer, and ask for a new Begevensht Yar. Okay. The Magid, the next generation, he went to the same location, but he didn't know how to light the fire the way the Baal Shem Tov did. So he would stand there and say the tefillos. The next generation, the Talmidei HaMagid, the Talmidim of the Magid, they knew the location, they didn't know how to light the fire, they didn't know the prayer, so they would just stand there. And we don't know how to light the fire, we don't know the prayers, we also don't even know the location, but we know the story. So we tell the story, and when we tell the story, we can achieve what they achieved through their actions, because that's all we have. That's the power of a story. So you talk about Sipur. I'm talking about Sefirot and Lashon Sipur. What's the power of telling a story? You hear a chassid telling a real beautiful story. Yeah, besides the nice story, everyone is touched by a story. It helps you connect to a place that's pure inside of you. And the Pul Nimshachas is the key thing. Everything's follow-up. They say, inspiration is easy. Maintenance contracts are far more expensive. To maintain it, if you can draw and touch somebody in a very deep place, as many people were touched by the Rebbe Sabrengen, I saw it. The challenge was a minute afterwards, or a day afterwards, like New Year resolutions. By Chassidim, they say, it holds from Esther Tanis bis Purim. You know what that means? When something holds from Esther turns to Purim means one day, basically. It's a Jewish way of saying it. So the key is, if you can touch someone in that place, and then give them some tools to access it, that it should actually generate and channel into our lives, then you're talking about causation. So I think what you're hitting is exactly the nail on the head. I couldn't agree more. But I've absolutely no doubt that all these levels are not splitting hairs. They're not here to tell us another level, and then another contradiction, another reconciliation. It's basically meant, what he's doing here, he's mapping out a bridge. I would call it stepping stones. So if you have a stepping stone here, and a stepping stone here, and you have no way to go from here to here, the Rebbe Rashab goes another chapter and gives you another stepping stone. So you can go from here to here to here to here. I think when you finish Chassidus properly, you have yourself stepping stones everywhere. So there's no way that you can't make it. And to me, it's a model for life. Now, mapping it this way is a whole other story. That's next step. The first thing is you got to know what the stepping stones are. But that's how I see it. I mean, I don't know if maybe I'm completely off. Maybe your question meant something else completely, but it doesn't matter. There's an excuse to say what I wanted to say anyway. But if I'm off what you wanted to talk about, we can talk about that too. Are we speaking the same language? Yeah. So that's the question. Now, I think right now, look. I see. First of all, as I said, when you learn this, you have to always ask the question, who cares? It's what I always say in every class I've ever given to anybody, secular, religious. Who cares? Why are we learning this? Why should I care about this? Or to put it more bluntly, how will life be? How is my life different because I learned this? I would challenge every Chabad Chassid to ask that question. The Alter Rebbe's Yahrzeit is coming 200 years. How would the world be different if the Alter Rebbe didn't exist? So now people right away will say, "What do you mean the whole world changed?" Blah 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 blah. Yeah, I understand. The platitudes are very easy to say. And you could say, for you as a Chabad Chassid, my life would be different. But tell me, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Can you give me a good way of saying in 5 minutes on CNN how 7 billion people's life has changed because the Alter Rebbe was born? Or for that matter, the Rebbe? Or for that matter, thousands of pages of Ayin Beis? Now, I've asked this question many times. Many people, when I ask this question, they think it's almost like irreverent or worse, sacrilegious. Like, how could you ask such a question? It sounds a little like apocryphal. Frankly, this question to me is the deepest emunah. If you don't have that question, then all this is not relevant to the world. So what are we saying exactly? It's only relevant, circumstantial relevance to a few subjective people that grew up in Crown Heights or grew up in Lubavitch homes. I mean, so that's the question. And if you can't answer this question, it's a good sign. You know why? Because it means you know that you don't know. And many people don't know they don't know. They think they know. So that's the first step to emancipation. To say, I really don't know, and now let's begin. So, trust me, I don't think I know better than many. I think I've learned more, but I think I asked the right questions. And I think you ask the right questions, you get somewhere. And you have to begin with that approach. I have no way, I cannot, look, we all got a Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. Let's just admit that. Would everybody agree? Or the illusion of a Yetzer Hara, let's put it that way.
Maybe the illusion of a Yetzer Tov.
We all got 2 voices. So there's no question, like someone came over to me the other day and say, I see you teaching Ayin Beis, you really believe all this? You know, I guess I have a reputation out there. So I said, it depends which side of my heart you ask. The Alter Rebbe is already paskent. One side of my heart I'm a skeptic, and the other side of the heart I'm a believer. What kind of question is that? And what about you? You like, well, both of your hearts have been taken care of? You know? That's obvious answer. The question is how much you're honest with yourself. So there's no question all of us have a part of us that's a total skeptic. You know, that's the way God created the world. He created an agnostic world. And he made a challenge. And you have temptations, and you have distractions, you have all the shtusim of Elam Hazeh. But if you're an honest person, you know that's one voice. And then there's another voice. I said the Rebbe once said in a Fabrengen, everybody's got flaws. The key thing is not to make a philosophy out of your flaws. That's the key thing. To know that I've got temptations, I got a Yetzer Hara, I have skepticism, or have my own cynicism, that's fine. But an honest person also knows there's another voice, and the other voice is maybe equally powerful, maybe more powerful. But the other voice tells me, the good voice that is, that if the Rebbe Rashab sat and wrote thousands of pages, too serious of a man to have wasted his time, God forbid. There was a reason he wrote this. And for people to say this is beyond me, to me is basically like telling the Rebbe Rashab, what you did was a waste of time. Because we're not on your level, and we don't get it. And that's just the worst possible thing. I have no problem if somebody wants to choose another path in life, and just deny the whole thing and say, listen, I have another voice, I'm following that, and the whole thing means nothing. But to say, I take it seriously, and not really take it seriously, that doesn't make sense to me. That to me is a major problem. That's laziness, frankly, and just plain mediocrity. That's my tantrum for this day of Nittel. Okay. So let's continue on, right? These tantrums are good. You should all have such tantrums. The Alter Rebbe became the Neshama Chadasha to make a revolution. Is this correct? A revolution that's bigger than Facebook, and bigger than Google, and bigger than Microsoft, and bigger than the four, what do they call it? The four horses, the four horsemen today. Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple. The Alter Rebbe came to make a bigger revolution than all four of them together. And tell me, where are we standing? It's a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer. Think about it. And who's supposed to be doing it if not us? Who are we exactly expecting? We're going to wait for what? For Mark Zuckerberg? He's got his hands full with reaching 1 billion plus people.
Well, you could definitely help them.
What's 1 billion? We need 7 billion. He's small fry, right? Huh? Well,
we're more than 7 people around the table. You know.
so can we take these four horsemen? Can we take these four horsemen? Which is actually not a Jewish reference. Oh, yes, can we take these four horsemen? Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple, and just like leap over them all?
Yeah, but I'm thinking that before you reach the 7 billion, the question is just when you reach the one individual, have we proved the efficacy of Hasidus, even on an individual level here in Crown Heights? So people that have learned, meaning that what I'm asking is that if your whole discussion about causation and should have an effect in our actual change our behavior, Sultan Aruch of Hasidus, so to speak, would you say unequivocally that the Hasidim that have learned Hasidus their whole life, that they are more holier, they're holier or better people or better Jews, every way you want to say it, than a frum Jew in Flatbush or wherever, Lakewood, has never learned any Hasidus in their life? Would you say that you've seen that change, that success?
Yes, and this me on the record, on the camera here, right? Okay, you know what? But I'm going to answer it on the record and on the camera because I have spoken about it more than once. You know, well, you could always, you know, the cute answer, which avoids everything, and I've done this, of course, when you're on television, you always have answers that don't answer anything, but they sound right. You know, so we know that art too. There's the art of not answering. Is like the story of Shmuel Levitin, who's a big chassid, a chassidish yid, knew a lot of chassidus, and yet he had a certain tough side to him, some called a little mean streak, you can say. So if someone has the Friedrich Rebbe, it says chassidus edel takes a person, refines somebody and makes them kinder, refiner. Look at Shmuel. I guess he had insulted him or something. So the Friedrich Rebbe, of course, said, imagine what he'd be like. Well, the Rebbe said it, so for me, if I say it's a cop-out, anyway, 1 second, let me finish, let me just say something. So Friedrich Rebbe said, what would he be like without it? As I said, if I say it's a cop-out, the Friedrich Rebbe said it, that means it's true, that there's no question that it does something. Now, but to answer your question, I have to answer 2 ways. And I'm being very straightforward. I'm not going to be evasive here at all. And you tell me if my promise, I deliver on that promise. You know, the word tinuk shenishba that we use, a child that's born into captivity, which is classified as many Jews today who don't even know what Shabbos is. So how could you expect them to keep Shabbos? They don't even know what it is. Or even if they learned the bar mitzvah lesson, what they learned was so meaningless that you can't, would you expect them to embrace that? And on the contrary, if they were any healthy, they'd run as fast as they could from it. I think this may sound controversial, but I really think that tinuk shenishba also applies to most religious Jews, what we call religious, and maybe even many what call themselves Chabad. What's a tinuk shenishba? Tinuk shenishba means someone that didn't learn Shabbos. I understand that. What happens if they learn Chassidus, but they didn't learn Chassidus? You can read these words just like you read anything and not learn it. Doesn't mean anything. It's anayim lehem v'lo yiro. They have eyes, but they don't see. So that, I'm not saying this as a defense to anyone. So I know many people who call themselves absolute Chabadniks, but they have no idea what Chassidus is. And some never learned it. And even those that learned it may not have an idea what it is. They learned it either Kabbalah or listen, there are people who know Tanya by heart. It's a very refining thing to know Tanya by heart, so whenever you're in the street, you can just think of words, holy words. But that doesn't mean they understand it. You could learn it without understanding it. And again, I'm just stating the fact. So therefore, there's number one. There are many people who've learned Chassidus and don't know Chassidus. The same thing, there are many people who eat kosher but are not kosher, if you know what I mean. It's not integrated. They eat kosher, so what? The Baal Shem Tov showed his students an ox and a strimal. An ox and a strimal eating chont. So eating, doing rituals doesn't make you into a refined person. Is it better than nothing? We could discuss that. I'm sure it is. Most religious people are cultural Jews. They grew up with it. And like any culture, has a power over you. You don't usually break away from your culture. It requires some extra effort to get away. The inertia of the status quo of culture is not that easy to break away from. Even if you're a thinking person. It's a comfort zone. You have to come to your parents' table and stand out and look different. Human nature is not that way, unless there's a strong reason, which is another discussion. So there's a lot of cultural element. Is culture itself a bad thing? I just saw the article Moral Animal from Sachs in the New York Times. She makes the argument, even from an evolutionary perspective, even a non-believer, religion creates bonds, creates community, which is a powerful thing in a depersonalized technological world. Community is a powerful force. Now, to me, is that a satisfying argument? Maybe for some people, I don't think it's a compelling argument. It's just practical. Definitely not. So I would say, to answer your question, my question is the same thing with if someone asked me the question, oh, you Orthodox Jews, you think you're better people because you follow Torah? You're a bunch of thieves, you do this, and that. Same thing I would say. You Chabad Chassidim, you think you're better because Chabad Chassidus? It's the same question. So my answer is we don't judge a system by people, you judge it by the system. When people ask me this question about comparing, in any society you want to compare, you don't compare. Everybody, especially Chabad, which has no elitism, in the sense where everybody's welcome. You have Sephardic Chabad, you have Ashkenazic, you have Geshe, not Geshe, you have French, Chinese, whatever. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Israeli, Argentinian, American, they're all so different. You put them all, Chabad itself is so different. If you want to measure, and I don't believe in measuring, but in case you want to measure, you take from two societies, you take the cream of the crop in both of them. And there I'm ready to tell you that the best Chabad Chassid who does know Chassidus and Nigla and is a Yiras Shamayim, I'd be ready to compare him to the best in any group. But if you took the whole spectrum, we have like everybody has. You got the whole spectrum of society. You have simple people, you have ignorant people, you have scum of the earth too, frankly. Pardon the expression. But if you take the top 5, then you see those are living by the doctrine. Same thing with the Torah. Someone that's really following the Torah properly, and then compare them to another group, there I do not be embarrassed at all. That would be my response to your question. Now, I want to just say one more thing. I don't know if our job here is to sit and measure or judge anyone in Crown Heights or anyone in the world. I look at myself. That's all that matters to me. I don't mean selfishly, because that's the only person I can work with is me. To sit and talk about other people, to me, has always been a sign of insecurity and, frankly, petty, and again, mediocre. Because why are we talking about other people? Chassidus Farbrengen was meant to be, people get Chassidus Farbrengen, to sit and talk about yourself, not talk about somebody else. That just deflects it. But the Friedrich Rebbe once said, it's easy to ride on someone else's horse, not on your own. So frankly, all I could do really, and I would say to each of us, is we have to look into ourselves and share. What are we doing? What are we not doing? I think that's the best way to change the world. To start saying now, let's take statistics in Crown Heights, how many guys are learning Chassidus? It's going to be sad statistics, so better not go there in the first place. When you go into 770 on an average day or Shabbos, I ask the question, what is the average conversation? I don't even want to talk about it. We all know what the average conversation is about. It doesn't have to be spelled out. So we're not here to talk negatively. It's people gravitate to the lowest common denominator. That's the natural comfort zone. We live in a world where we're not really challenged by so-called Nazis and communists. We don't have to be a Mesiras Nefesh for our Yiddishkeit. So our standards become very lax and very, very diluted. With complacency, apathy. Now, but we have it. We're sitting here learning Ayin Beis. As I said, there's the Alter Rebbe, 200 years. I just imagine what the Rebbe would be saying. So, for me, maybe I was saturated with it. I heard the Rebbe, every day, every week, never letting anyone be complacent. 200 years, the Alter Rebbe would be turning over the whole world. You should do it. You see what he said 50 years ago. I've been reading now the Sichos of Tafshin Chav Gimel, 1963, 50 years ago. Unbelievable. Read those Sichos. You don't need anything. All the directives are right there, because there's not one thing there that was done. Interestingly. So what do you need? So I'm thinking to myself, what would be 50 years later? The Rebbe will be saying the same thing and more. So I'm not even surprised. I mean, this may also sound shocking. When the Rebbe said, the Chav Zayin, before Chav Ches Nissen, the famous one, I did everything, now you're. I'm not shocked by that at all. He did do everything. What do you want him to do? To repeat the same thing he's been saying for 40 years? He said 1,000 different ways. He said, change the world. I'm giving you all the tools. Chassidus. You have thousands of pages. Take it seriously. Turn it into a blueprint that changes the world. What do you want me more to? What can I say? Now, obviously, emotionally, I would like the Rebbe to be here right now and say more. But let's be honest. I remember when I was 17 years old, was the year the Rebbe stopped Yechidus for birthdays. It was Tov Shalom Adalad. Every year we'd go in for our birthdays. I went in for a bar mitzvah. Then 14, 15, 16, 17 was my last time. I remember when I was 16, 17. And we just did it by mechanically. It was like a assembly line of robots. We'd go, write a note. All I did was copy my note from last year, to be very honest. Why do I have to create a new one? Because they told, upon this, you write, you get online, the Rebbe would, and you went in. It was obviously awesome to be in the Rebbe's room. You saw the Rebbe there. But I said to myself, I remember, and I was a kid, and I still said, what am I wasting the Rebbe's time here? What am I doing here? I came here last year. I wrote the same note. Nothing changed. I'm the same Grubber Jung. What am I doing here? So good. Everyone does it. So I also did it. And then lo and behold, Chayel Lamed Daled, the Rebbe brings and says, besides the time factor, the Rebbe's time was getting more and more people coming, the Rebbe said that we're going to be stopping the Yechidus for birthdays. And he said exactly this reason. He said, the Zelber Bacher kommt herein, jeden Jahr, the same face, no change. He writes me the same note. I felt he was talking to me. But then I realized he was talking to all of us, because we're all the same robots. The same note, I give him the same brachas, and then he comes back again next year, and the same thing again. As the Rebbe said, basically. Now, obviously, as emotionally, I'd love to just stand with the Rebbe, even if I'm wasting his time, right? But I'm not interested in wasting. At some point, you become a little mature. I'm not interested in wasting the Rebbe's time. There was a big argument then by Chassidish Bachman, which I wasn't in that category yet, or not ever maybe. But I was younger. But the older Bachman would argue, should you go into Yechidus? When you were able to go. Some said, what are you doing? Did you do anything? Did you change anything in your life? You're ready to change anything, you're just coming. And others said, no, the Rebbe is our father, he's our Rebbe. Pour out everything, your soul to him. Tell him about all your Avedas. You're not going to change, but he has to know. Maybe something will happen. And I always wondered which category. I never reached that age. I was 17. I was still relatively. I probably would be in the former category. I would probably not go because I would say to myself, what am I doing exactly? Am I ready to really work on myself? You're ready to really control your Yetzer Hara and the things you're asking the Rebbe about? Or you just want him to give you a magical blessing? I'm just telling you personally. I'm not saying to anybody. Everybody can make their own choices. But I say to myself, as a mature adult right now, more mature, let's put it this way, than I was, that the Rebbe said exactly what he said. He's absolutely right. He gave us everything. What else do we need? 7 generations of Rabbeim gave us a blueprint. What have we done with it? If the Rebbe was here physically now, another 20 years, since, 18 years since Gimel Tammuz, we'd have another 18 years of Maimorim and Chassidus. And based on the track record of what was before, we'd be doing exactly with it what we did till now. Tell me, at some point, is it a waste of time or not? I know this sounds sacrilegious, but I'd like. By the way, I'm talking to myself here. I just happen to have an audience. So I say to myself, there's a part of me, my Yetzer Hara even. I feel the pride of wanting to change the world with Chassidus, because that's what the Rabbi wanted to do, and I cannot stand the fact. I talk now simply from a competition point of view, that there's a Facebook and an Amazon, an Apple and a Google, and we're not even in the same league. That bothers me tremendously. You tell me, is it my ego? No, I don't think it's pure ego. I think it's a good cause. But it's also ego, so what's wrong? Let's use the ego for that purpose. Everyone's using it anyway for making money or trying to make money, so might as well use it for making money and making chassidus, whatever. So anyway, this is all pshat in Heid v'Hadar of Perek of Dalet of Ayin Beis.
On one hand, in the beginning of the class, I answered your question. I mean, you were saying how this is a blueprint for change. And very positive. You were speaking very positively about it. Here, the Rabbi, what is he wasting our time? Here's do it with the. And then the second part of your explanation right now seems pretty pessimistic in a sense. I took it as pessimistic, meaning that after all this, after 40 years,
But you could no, but you're looking at others. You're looking at others. Look at yourself.
I'm looking at myself.
And you're pessimistic?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I guess so. I mean, you're sort of pessimistic you were pessimistic about yourself. I think you were saying that, why would I go into the Rabbi? I'm the same bacher, and he gave me the brachas. I know what I have to learn, especially you know all the chassidus. And are you really changing so much yourself? Were you? And what you indicated is that you didn't change so much as a bacher. Maybe now you have. What I'm just trying to say
Not really.
is that this, if we can't prove that this system, the equation works, the program works on a limited basis, even here to people that know Hasidus, that have learned it, and you don't really see this dramatic change of Beinani. We should be producing Beinani, right? Safer Beinani. We should be. Do we see many Beinanis around here? I don't know. If you do,
until Bar Mitzvah, they're Beinanis.
If you're going to say, I want to go out and change the 7 billion people and bring it to them, I feel frustrated, and yet, even show that these
I must respond to this. No, it's an excellent question, but one second. It's not the first time we've talked about this, right? It's an excellent question, and I have to use the Rebbe's own words to answer this question. This was a big debate over all the years of the Rebbe's leadership. I remember this as a bacher earlier. Everyone talked about this. What the Rebbe's view was on Avodas Hashem. Avodah. There was once a time where the Rebbe Rashab, the Friedrich Rebbe, they wrote Kuntus HaTfilah, Kuntus HaAvodah, and it was demanded that a bacher has to sit and daven hours. Physically daven hours. People would go to Paris, Brunois, and they would see Rabbi Nissen sit 5-6 hours davening. That alone changed people's lives. They couldn't believe a man sits like that. So this was the whole thing of working on yourself, especially through davening. And then came, and the Rebbe, even though the Rebbe mentions Avodas HaTfilah, and obviously did not change any doctrine, but in practical, the Rebbe's real demand was go on shlichus. Go out there, build. That's what he said. He never said, I want half of you to stay here and daven all day, or one of 2 or 3 of you. It was basically activism. So the question is really, did the Rebbe change doctrine? God forbid. But maybe times have changed, which means today, first of all, the fires of ignorance and assimilation are burning. Pekuach nefesh, you can't be sitting under a talus when the fire is burning and saying, I got to take care of my bir hamidus. There's a fire outside. That's one end. But I don't believe it was just as simple as that. I think it's a deeper thing here, because I remember a few sikhs, more than a few, in studying this. Number one, the Rebbe would never change the doctrine of Chassidus. God forbid, it's not shaykh. The Alter Rebbe established a system. The Rebbe is not coming and suddenly say, 6 generations of Avodas HaTfilah, now we're only into learning Chassidus and doing Mivtzayim. No way. And just look at any Sikh of the Rebbe. Every Sikh of the Rebbe was difficult Sikh. The Rebbe didn't speak simple things. Everything was hard work. It was hard work to hear the Rebbe and understand. The Rebbe was not a simple speaker that he spoke 5 minutes in inspiration. There was Avodah in that itself. So I'm convinced, there's no question in my mind, that it's not just a matter of taint of time, which it also is. There's more assimilation and all that. And remember, in times of the Alter Rebbe, even in time of the Rebbe Rashab, what access did we have to an outside world besides the few shtetl we lived in? There was no technology. All you had was your shtetl. So besides those circumstantial factors, I think there's a divine factor. In Chassidus it says that every generation has its birur. We all start with Adam Arishan. The early generations were the head of Adam, Moichin. Then came the Avodah of Midas, which was Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, time of Moshe Rabbeinu, Beis Hamikdash. Then comes Golus, which is Nehi, the lowest part of the body. That's what it says in Chassidus. We're called Ikvus of the Mashiach because all those 9 levels have been primarily dealt with. Our main Avodah is in Netzach and Hoid, the Maimarim say, in Maisa, like the foot soldiers. Not that we shouldn't learn Torah, not that we shouldn't have Avodah, but primarily, our main thing is action. And we stand on the shoulders of giants, which means we are cumulative. It's not instead of what they did then. Every Aveda of Chassidim, a generation ago, 2 generations ago, is in our credit too. It also shapes us. I think what the Rebbe was saying was that the Aveda today, Aveda Satfila today, is if you go to a community and you learn Chassidus and teach Chassidus, and you teach people how to daven, and you do it with them, it will be the best way for you to get to that place. In other words, the easiest way today to inspire yourself is through inspiring others. And maybe the Chassidim Rishonim of the Alter Rebbe did not have quite the same, because maybe they had it within them. Like in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, maybe they were able to generate it from above, whatever, Susa de Leila. Today, I personally think, and this is my answer to you, cut out the word pessimism. I can't stand that word. It's hepech everything I know and everything of the Rebbe. So, no. The key thing is to understand this. We're sitting here and learning Ayin Beis or Chassidus is for us to inspire each other and absolutely turn this into a blueprint for others with tefillah and everything, and that's the best way for us to become more Chassidische, maskilim and ovdim. That's my response to you. So, I would not look at, okay, how come it didn't have an impact? You're basically speaking like a businessman. You're saying to me, you want my venture capital? Show me what you've done so far. Let's take your pilots. Let me see what your formula has done. And I look around, and it hasn't done. I don't have confidence in it. If you can't get it done in your own environment, why should I give you $1 million to bring it to an environment that's hostile to this? I understand what you're saying. So my response to that, and maybe you write a check after this, a spiritual check, is like this. My response, by the way, my response to you is, I would say you're absolutely right, but my model is not what you're saying. I'm not telling you that it's worked here. I'm telling you that we only have 7 generations of it, and we have a formula that I can show you some examples of how it's worked. But right now, everybody needs it, from Crown Heights to everyone. So I'm not going to give you a sample of a laboratory where I see it's worked. I can only show you individuals, and there are individuals for sure. And if you said to me, bring those individuals to the table, I'll bring them to the table. But I'm not going to bring a community. I'll bring individuals. And some of them may be sitting right here at this table too. Now I think, and our job is to have confidence. Yes, it'd be hard for a venture capitalist to buy this, because he'll say, I have not learned this. So unless you show me that it's working, and I'll say to you, how many people do you need for me to work? If you told me you need 100 people, I'll bring you 100 people. I'm just, speaking your language. I honestly, it's not the number of people. I would have to say that it's still in its infancy, and that we haven't done the job. And we need angel investors here. We're going to take a little more risk than just showing you 1,000 people that have already drank the Kool-Aid, because it's not a good example. An average Lubavitcher. It's true. I would not use them as an example. Not that everybody is beautiful people and everyone does great things, but as an example of transformation that you're discussing, you're going to be hard pressed to find it in real. But I will tell you this, and I want to add one thing. I think it's going to be easier to change secular people than so-called Lubavitchers. So your investment will be well worth it, because don't look. That's what I would say. And I'm absolutely confident of this. I have no question in my mind. Look, psychological models are out there right now. There is the Buddhist, there's the New Age, there's the Tony Robbins of the world, the Deepak Chopras, the Wayne Dyers. I can make the whole list. The question is our goods as good as theirs, if not better? I can tell you right now, it's absolutely better. So let's prove it. And by the way, I'm ready to say that if we can't prove it, then we failed. Fine. But I'm not concerned, because I know we could prove it. So we need money now to prove it.
And your answer that.
But it's not the money. You understand? I understand.
And your confidence that you can prove it is based not on your self-admitted that it hasn't really shown itself successful here, and the reason why.
No, individuals. I know. I will definitely show you people. I have individuals. I can't say communal, like someone walks down Kingston Avenue and just plucks everyone out and says, "Wow, these are all transformed people." I wish it was true.
If you're going to invest in a new drug,
I think it's much better than the other.
if you're going to invest in a new
when
The new drug, you have
A new
trial,
drug, it's a small sample, but you have also
And then you
success
extrapolate
rates.
from
You
that.
have
Then
success
it's
rates in
better
drugs,
than-
and if you don't have a proper trials that show a certain significant increase in the
Well, that's what I'm
success
saying.
rate, you don't, you.
But you have to also know what's not happening, the things that you don't know about. There are things behind the scenes that are very, very. There is, and I don't know if the numbers are less here than other communities.
Would you invest in that as a
I've
biogen?
had that go on trial.
I've been there.
But anyway, the point of the matter is, I'll tell you one thing. For me, I'm supremely confident in the power of the formula. I'm supremely confident in its impact, and I would even tell you that if we did it right, we will be able to measure results. I'm not just saying theories and stuff like that. I think we could measure results. And what we spoke with, this whole started was, by the way, causation means a system that one thing can cause another, not just, there's Haid.
Sure.
How do you bring Haid into Hadar and Hadar into the next levels? Look, the expression is, the Zohar says it perfectly. Istakel baraisha baralma. God looked into the Torah, the blueprint, and created. Barnash or Bnei Yisrael, I think Barnash, and a human being is Istakel baraisha v'kayim alma. And we human beings are meant to look at this blueprint and preserve or sustain the world. So there's a blueprint.
Safer.
There's a blueprint. A blueprint that the way it was, the process, the engineer gave us his engineering plans, and we can replicate it to realign all the distortions. Simple as that. So his engineering plans of how the whole thing works, how one thing leads to the next causation, and how we can retrace the steps and take a broken machine and realign it all the way back and better. That's in a nutshell. In a microcosm, that means an individual life. Yes, the best way to demonstrate this is to take somebody who's dysfunctional, began through Chassidus and its models and its formulas, has improved and transformed their lives, and they're healthy, functional husband or father or mother or wife, and building their life. Doesn't mean that they solved all their problems. No, but there's there's a working model. Can you find examples of this today? You can. You're not going to find thousands, but you're going to find some. Not every Baal Tshuva is an example, because some maybe if you're a real scientist, you could say some maybe were drawn to this, not necessarily always for the healthiest reasons. Maybe process of elimination. What they had in their world was far worse, and this was nurturing. This was family. And then you'll have, I say Baal Tshuva. I don't believe the word Baal Tshuva. You know what I'm talking about? People that so-called, because that would be an example. Someone born into it, you could say, hey, that's just cultural. It would have to be someone who's drawn to it. Why were you drawn to it? And there's challenges there. By the way, I'm challenged many times. Secular thinking people I deal with, psychologists who are smart, they come to my classes, they ask me, they say, tell me, this Chassidic model that you're saying, can you show me people who become healthier families and so on? And they want to study not just them, they want to see their children and grandchildren, obviously. Because if you could demonstrate that, you have the secret of life. Now, I have no doubt that God gave us, that from this perspective, God created life, gave us the blueprint, gave us Chassidus, and our job is to turn it into such a model. And I think it could be done. And I'm not talking about just for intellectuals. Intellectuals maybe are the teachers, are the conceivers. But this needs to be turned into a workable plan for everybody. I mean, the Alter Rebbe said he did not give Chassidus for a party, maflege. He didn't want it for elite. Because some argued, Chassidus is for the elite. You've got to be a certain caliber of intelligence. You have to be interested. You have to be spiritual. But he didn't say that. He said it's for everyone. I sometimes wonder, I meet people and I don't see any spirituality in them. They're not even interested. God tell me, I understand money and women. What do you tell? I don't understand anything else. What are you telling me these things? I hear this all the time.
Money and women.
Don't say that, because then your drawing to Chassidus will be seen as, because you didn't understand it. That's why this is like default. No. I told you the story about the guy that what Chassidus did to him, how he knew it was true. Because it took away this taiva, taiva's noshim. That's what he told me. Now, I don't know if I'd use him as a model, because he's a different character altogether. But
90 years old at that time.
Look, there are many ways to go here with this. How to turn this into an actual product and how to replicate it. I don't think it's one way. I think it includes psychological models that help people in a therapeutic and psychological context for sure. But I think there's also elements of it that are practical. I mean, there's a lot of dimensions how to do this. Well, what time is it? What? It's 11.
Doing good, we're doing good.
We're doing good. So let me just see here. Where are we going to stop here? What are we going to do? Okay, I think we should stop here because this is a heavy chapter. But let me just sum up at least so we say what we learned here. So he's beginning to explain how there's Sefirot in Bli Gvul. And essentially the point is that it's clarity. I think a good example for this would be, let's say somebody conceives of building a structure. So he's the idea guy. You know, that idea is then translated by an architect or engineers into a blueprint, right? Then they hire in turn a contractor, and you start hiring all the people you need. Electricity and plumbing and the schematics, whatever it takes to build the whole thing, right? Now they're starting to build the details, the building blocks. Now you need to have someone that's aligning it to the kavanah, the plan. Or else suddenly the plumbers will say, you know what, that doesn't really work here, let's change this. This one will say, let's change that. So you need someone that's controlling, someone that's directing the project. And the director is essentially aligning the plan to the details. Now the details here, let's call them the Sefirot. They're the building blocks. They're the Chochmah here, Bina here, Chesed here, Gvura, right? But they have to be informed by Kesed, which is the Ratzon, the plan, which in turn is informed by the real heart and soul of the Creator. It's not just a plan on paper, it's also what he really wants out of this building. So you could say Hoid is the first level, is the Etzem Ha'er, is like the pure light, core light of what, in the deepest part of the heart and soul of this conceiver, what he wants out of this structure. The Hispashus Ha'er, which is called Hadar here, is already how it's manifesting, not in a plan yet, but in some type of expression. He's saying, here's what I want. That in turn will become a type of global plan, which in turn will become the 10 spheres. So the word Sefirot means both number, the details, Chochmah Bina, but they also mean brightness. So it depends what you're asking. If you go and you see the details in the building, you say, what are we focusing on? If you want to focus on the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, right? So then you're focusing on the Sefirot as a number or story, telling you a deeper story. That's the next level. But if you want to focus on the brightness of it, I want to know what is the soul of this building. What is the soul of this living room? What is its real, deep, innermost meaning? Then Sefirot is from the word brightness. Then you have to go to the Er HaBli Gvul, because that's going to give you far more picture of how it is from Gili HaEtzem, what the Etzem wants out of this, as opposed to the actual details of the structure. So I think what you have here is both like the Eir of the Kalim, of the Sefirot. That's like the Misper, the number. You have the story, which is really the Eiris within the Kalim, and higher, until you go all the way to the Eir Atzmi, which gives you the brightest picture, in the clearest way. So only one that knows that is the conceiver himself. As soon as it starts being translated to others, it's going to become more and more diminished. It's another way of explaining this. And I think when we're talking about a blueprint, you want to be able to touch people in that place. When you want to touch someone, they give you a problem. You don't want to just deal with them on the functional level. You want to get to their heart and soul of where they are, what their etzem ha-nefesh is like. You touch someone in their etzem ha-nefesh, you got them. You touch them in the externals, it's superficial. So you want their etzem to inform their externals, basically. You want to reach the deepest part of the engineering room and rewire, so to speak, realign, and then their behavioral life should change. So that's the causation, the process. Okay, we'll stop here. We did the beginning of chapter Kuf Chav Daled, page 240, and we shall resume.